Hi guys, Ted Elsner, Sacramento Historical Fencing Academy. Figured that while we're standing around waiting for the apocalypse to end, we could all take an opportunity to work on our skills, kind of talk through some different material. So this is going to be the first in a probably series of posts that I'm going to do, just kind of general thoughts on historical fencing and how we can train, what we can learn from it. And the first thing that I want to talk about today actually is specifically the question of what are we doing, right? Like, HEMA is such a broad category thing that often we make the mistake when dealing with other people in the community of assuming that we all have the same kind of priorities, that we have the same interests, that we're all trying to do the same thing. This has really been highlighted lately with some discussions that have occurred on Facebook in the historical fencing community regarding, specific intent. I think at the end of the day, we have to accept that we're all a really broad umbrella. Yeah, excuse me a second. You getting her? Yeah, good job. So I think we have to accept that in the historical fencing community, the HEMA community, we're a really broad umbrella. There's a lot of different things that draw people in to doing this thing, right? Some people are hyper-focused on a single source. That's what their interest is. Maybe it's Fiore. Maybe it's part of the early Lichtenauer tradition with, what's effectively, I'm going to refer to it from here on out as RDL, okay? The three main glosses in the early tradition. Maybe, like myself, it's Meyer that you're interested in. Or it's Bolognese, it's, 17th century Italian rapier. Maybe it's the 133 and you like really early stuff. So for some people, it's all about trying to understand a particular source in the context that it's provided in, and that's it. That's all. They want to reproduce exactly what's in the text. Depending on the era, this can be easier or more difficult. Earlier source stuff tends to have less available. It's just a function of the way that time works, and so there's not as many options to draw from. Later sources can do it a lot more easily. And if that's what your interest is, that's awesome. But understand that's not everybody's interest, right? I'm a Meyer guy. I love Meyer. But I'm actually not super hyper-focused on recreating Meyer's 1570 exactly as it's written. That's not what I want to do. Rather, I'm interested in learning what Meyer knew. Excuse me a second. Hi. Yeah. Oh. Do you have your sword? Where's your sword? Get your sword. You gonna get your sword? Yeah! You gonna attack? You gonna go attack Mama? Okay, go attack Mama. Right, so as I was saying, maybe it's, for me, it's not about trying to recreate the exact material of 1570. One of the major reasons for that is that's not the only work that Meyer produced, right? Unlike somebody that's saying do Ringek, where we have his gloss, but we don't have the original. We have copies of copies of copies in a lot of cases. And we don't know, much about the original guy's intent. With Meyer, we have a much better idea. We have 3 surviving manuals that we can draw from. So with Meyer, we have 3 surviving manuals that we can draw from, of which the 1570 is by far the largest, but it's not his only work. There's the Lund manuscript, sometimes known as the 1568, and then there's the Rostock manuscript, the one that, as far as we know, he was working on at the time of his death. And with the Rostock, it's especially an interesting manual because not only does it have work that we know is in Meyer's hand that he was working on specifically, it's got other notes in it. It's got a copy of Ringek. It's got a copy of Lev in it. It's got these other masters' works, and so it really gives us an insight into what it was that Meyer was doing. So for me, that's the much more interesting question, is understanding and not trying to recreate the 1570, but trying to understand what were the sources that Meyer was pulling from, what was he trying to teach. Now, sometimes that means that I'm going to do things maybe not exactly the way that he did in the 1570 because I'm working from the same source and I'm drawing conclusions that I think are in line with what he's telling us. even though it may not be the exact same thing. So a good example of that is a question that came up recently for me regarding the hangings and the windings, right? When you read the longsword section, the windings and the hangings are different, right? They definitely don't feel like the earlier RDL tradition hangings. Meyer's very explicit about this, right? The hanging from below comes because we've come up from flug into a ox-like position with the flat of the sword being what we're catching on. And I can't do it against my target here, but like strong on strong. So that then from this position, we can wind the short edge to strike around as they push on our sword, or wind back the long edge to strike in and give us that. And it's a very interesting take on what winding is. And if that's all you're reading in Meyer, then you're going to be left with this assumption of that's what he thought of as winding. But then you go and look at his other weapons, most notably the windings as they occur in the rapier section. And suddenly there we're finding windings that look a lot more like what we would assume from the RDL tradition. And again, it's hard to define, right? We're told, okay, they've come on top of my sword. All right, so I want to wind the short edge in. Now, does that mean that I'm going to turn my long edge out, or that I'm going to try and turn my long edge up? I don't know. But we can apply some basic rules, some basic thoughts, and kind of get to some general ideas, right? If I turn the long edge out, short edge in, that gives me basically a crump-like motion, the reversing to come across with, so I can then wind in, come back, and in some cases catch, especially with a curved quillion, rotate the hand up and through, and end up in something that feels and looks much more like what we assume the RDL tradition is telling us, right? Done one-handed, kind of the same thing. If I strike in, if I try and turn that winding in, that's going to be kind of difficult to pull off. But if I struck in long and then turn the short and wind it over and up, that suddenly becomes much more easy to pull off in the process. Try not to stab myself in the face as I go through and do this, or my daughter. Hi, Kara. Yeah, okay. So it's kind of a long, meandering way of saying, think about what your goals are with historical fencing. Are you interested in doing a particular manuscript, and maybe it's an early one, and you just want to work with that, and you're not going to pull any outside sources in? Maybe you want to do what I do, which is to work from a specific manuscript, but then look at the things that we know influenced that manuscript. In my case, for Meyer, being earlier parts of the German tradition, but also I look at contemporary Italian stuff. What's going on, with the Bolognese? What's going on in Venice? What's even going on in France? I'm right now reading Didier, which is a very interesting kind of work. So that's a possibility. Maybe the third option that you decide is, well, you don't really care. You just want to learn to fight good with swords. So in that kind of situation, you're pulling, the pan-European approach, pulling from here, pulling from there. Personally, that's the one I like the least, because if we go completely pan-Europeanist, that often looks and feels like a bag of tricks. Like we're not approaching this material from a systematic point of view, but we're looking at, oh, well, what technique is over here? What technique is over there? And picking and pulling and trying to assemble these all together. Personal opinion, doesn't matter. If you understand the rules that build a system, then every technique can be found as a rule. Exceptions exist within that system, right? You might have some elements that are maybe not explicitly told, but implicitly arise from the teachings, right? For instance, I mentioned this in the live stream the other day. There's the classic kind of Fiori taking off or from Boar's Tooth up through Codolonga through Breve, Frontale. I don't know. I really don't know my Italian, but it's basically a short edge to strike out that might come right back in with a long edge. And to be fair, this is given explicitly in Meyer in the rapier section as a from Wechsel striking out, ausnehmen with the short edge, that then can come back in with the long, can strike out with the short, wind, and thrust, or can strike out, thrust, be set aside, and finished as a strike. Yeah. So all those are possibilities, but they arise from rules that Meyer gives us within the system of how to deal with various strikes, how to deal with various situations. So choose, I guess, at the end of the day. What is HEMA to you? What is historical fencing to you? Maybe you're just, in it for the swords, which is totally fine. Maybe you're at the opposite end, in it to really understand and recreate the specific fencing of one period. Totally fine. Maybe you fall somewhere in between. So just wanted to talk about that a little bit today, guys. Give you a feel of what it is that I'm doing in Sacramento, what it is that our kind of goal is, and put it all in context. So hopefully you've enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them in the comments down below. We'll take a look at them and respond to them. And then, always like, subscribe, follow us on Facebook. We're going to have more stuff coming out over the next few days, few weeks, few months, depending on how long all of this goes, especially while we don't have class available to us. See you there, guys.